For centuries, Europe believed armor, faith, and numbers guaranteed victory. Then, in just 3 days, that belief collapsed. The enemy didn't attack the knights first. They attacked what the knights believed about war. And once that belief broke, nothing held together. Stay, and you'll discover how the Mongols defeated an army by dismantling its confidence, why hesitation became deadlier than steel, and how 3 days reshaped Europe's sense of security forever. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Europe believed it understood war, believed it had mastered it through armor, hierarchy, banners, and faith, believed that numbers, steel, and tradition were enough to guarantee survival. And this belief had hardened over centuries into certainty, a certainty so complete that when reports began drifting westward of an approaching force from beyond the horizon, they were dismissed not as threat, but as exaggeration, stories told by frightened borderlands and distant traders, because the idea that a society without castles, without heavy armor, without feudal lineage could challenge Europe's military order felt absurd, almost insulting. And this is why the shock that followed was not immediate panic, but confusion, because confusion is what follows when reality refuses to behave the way belief insists it should. And the Mongols understood this long before they ever met a European knight, because their greatest weapon was never speed or coordination alone. It was the ability to collapse certainty, to make opponents question what they thought they knew about strength, control, and safety. And by the time Europe realized what was approaching, the ground beneath its confidence had already begun to shift, quietly, invisibly, without announcement. Because the Mongols did not arrive as conquerors announcing intention, they arrived as a problem that existing rules could not solve. And this made them far more dangerous than any enemy Europe had previously faced. And the 3 days that would follow were not simply a clash of forces, but a confrontation between two entirely different understandings of war, order, and survival. One rooted in rigidity, the other in adaptation. And it is this contrast, rather than numbers alone, that explains why the outcome felt so incomprehensible to those who witnessed it. Because the Mongols did not fight the battle Europe expected. They dismantled the assumptions Europe relied upon, and when those assumptions collapsed, so did everything built upon them. And this collapse unfolded not as chaos, but as method, step by step, decision by decision, across a span of time so short that later chroniclers struggled to reconcile it with what they believed was possible. And to understand how 3 days could reshape an entire continent's sense of security, one must first understand how Europe prepared for war, because preparation reveals belief, and belief determines vulnerability, and European knights prepared for confrontation through ceremony, through rank, through visible order, assembling beneath banners that signaled identity and allegiance, believing that strength was something that could be displayed, measured, and respected. And this belief shaped not only how they fought, but how they thought, because the battlefield was imagined as a place of honor, structure, and mutual recognition, where enemies acknowledged each other's presence and engaged according to understood conventions. And these conventions created predictability, and predictability created comfort, because comfort allowed commanders to plan, to anticipate, to believe that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. And the Mongols exploited this reliance on predictability relentlessly, because their entire system was designed around unpredictability, not as chaos, but as control. And control that cannot be anticipated feels like fate to those who experience it. And fate is far more paralyzing than fear, because fear can be managed, but fate feels inevitable, and the Mongols cultivated this sensation deliberately, not through intimidation, but through absence, because they rarely appeared where they were expected, and when they did appear, they refused to behave in ways that made sense to European observers. And this refusal created hesitation, and hesitation in war is more damaging than any single mistake, because it spreads uncertainty through ranks that rely on cohesion, and cohesion was Europe's greatest strength and its greatest weakness, because it required everyone to move together, to respond together, to trust the system implicitly, and once that trust began to erode, the system could not adapt quickly enough to compensate, and this erosion began even before contact was made. As scouts returned with inconsistent reports describing movements that contradicted established logic, forces that seemed to vanish and reappear, actions that appeared reckless until their purpose became clear, and this inconsistency unsettled commanders accustomed to linear progression, because linear thinking depends on stable inputs. And the Mongols denied stability at every level, not by overwhelming force, but by selective engagement, by choosing when not to fight as carefully as when to engage. And this choice confused European leaders who interpreted withdrawal as weakness rather than strategy, because within their framework, retreat implied failure. And this misinterpretation would prove costly, because it led to pursuit. And pursuit under false assumptions is an invitation to disaster. And as forces converged, the stage was set not for a conventional confrontation, but for a psychological unraveling. Because the Mongols did not seek immediate dominance, they sought control over tempo, forcing their opponents to react rather than act. And reaction is always slower than intention. And this difference in tempo created gaps in formation, in communication, in decision-making. And these gaps widened rapidly once pressure was applied, not through brute force, but through precision. And precision feels invisible until its effects accumulate. And by the time European knights recognized that something fundamental was wrong, the 3 days had already begun, and those days would not unfold as a single continuous struggle, but as a sequence of moments that compounded uncertainty, each one reinforcing the sense that familiar rules no longer applied. And this realization was deeply unsettling because it challenged the belief that superiority was inherent, that faith, armor, and lineage guaranteed advantage. And when those guarantees failed to manifest, morale faltered, not dramatically, but subtly, as confidence drained away, replaced by caution, and caution slowed response. And slow response allowed the Mongols to dictate the pace entirely, and this control over pace was decisive, because it meant that Europe was always arriving at the wrong conclusion slightly too late, always preparing for a situation that had already changed. And this lag created the impression of omnipresence, as if the Mongols were everywhere at once. And omnipresence breeds helplessness, because it suggests that resistance is futile. And while later accounts would struggle to describe what happened without resorting to exaggeration, those present understood something simpler and far more disturbing, that they were not losing because they lacked courage or strength, but because they were fighting a system that had been designed to dismantle their own. And this understanding, once it settled in, altered behavior rapidly, as decisions became reactive, defensive, and fragmented. And fragmentation is fatal to forces built on unity. And it is here, in this breakdown of cohesion, that the true shock of the 3 days begins to take shape, because the Mongols did not defeat an army, they defeated a worldview, and the consequences of that defeat would echo far beyond the battlefield, reshaping how Europe thought about war, borders, and vulnerability for generations. And as the first day gave way to the second, the weight of this realization began to press heavily on those involved, because once certainty is broken, it cannot be restored quickly, and broken certainty leaves space for doubt. and doubt undermines every order issued thereafter. And this psychological shift, more than any maneuver, explains why the events of those 3 days would be remembered not just as a military encounter, but as a moment when Europe confronted the limits of its own assumptions and found them wanting. And as the narrative continues, the specific choices, reactions, and misunderstandings that defined the second and third days reveal how quickly a seemingly unassailable system can unravel when faced with an opponent who refuses to play by its rules, setting the stage for a conclusion that would leave chroniclers searching for language strong enough to convey not just what happened, but how profoundly it altered the European sense of security. By the time the second day arrived, the battle no longer felt like a confrontation between two armies. It felt like a test of endurance against something that refused to take shape, because the Mongols had achieved what few forces ever managed to do to European knights. They had removed clarity, and without clarity, strength becomes clumsy, because strength depends on knowing where to apply itself. And the knights, trained to commit fully once the enemy revealed itself, found themselves waiting for a moment that never came. And waiting drains momentum faster than defeat, because it allows doubt to grow unchecked. And this doubt spread quietly through the ranks as commanders attempted to impose order on a situation that resisted structure, issuing instructions that were immediately rendered obsolete by movements that defied expectation. And this mismatch between command and reality created a sense that leadership itself was falling behind events. And when leaders appear uncertain, even briefly, confidence erodes rapidly, because armies move on belief as much as discipline. And belief was precisely what the Mongols targeted, not by confronting it directly, but by making it unreliable. And as European forces attempted to regroup, they discovered that the landscape itself seemed to work against them, because the Mongols had chosen their engagements carefully, drawing opponents into positions that restricted movement and visibility. And while nothing about the terrain appeared threatening on its own, its combination with relentless pressure created exhaustion, and exhaustion blurs judgment, making even experienced fighters vulnerable to miscalculation. And the Mongols exploited this by maintaining constant motion, not to overwhelm, but to deny rest, because rest restores confidence, and confidence was the true objective. And as the day progressed, the knights began to realize that the battle was being fought on terms they did not control, because every attempt to assert dominance resulted not in decisive engagement, but in dispersal, forcing them to chase shadows rather than confront an enemy. And this chasing fragmented formations, weakening the cohesion upon which their effectiveness depended. And cohesion, once broken, is difficult to restore under pressure, because restoring it requires time, and time was something the Mongols never allowed. And this relentless tempo created the illusion that the Mongols were endless, that no matter how many times they disengaged, they would always return. And this illusion was psychologically devastating, because it transformed the enemy from a finite force into a persistent condition, something that could not be defeated, only endured. And endurance without progress quickly becomes despair, and despair changes behavior, causing hesitation where decisiveness is required. And this hesitation was visible in the way orders were followed more cautiously, in the way movements slowed, and in the way individuals began to focus on immediate survival rather than collective objective. And this shift marked a critical turning point, because once an army begins to think individually, its ability to function as a unified force collapses. And the Mongols understood this dynamic intimately, because their own strength lay in coordination without rigidity, allowing units to operate independently while remaining aligned toward a shared goal. And this flexibility contrasted sharply with the European reliance on centralized command, which struggled to adapt when communication faltered. And as the second day wore on, the cumulative effect of these pressures became impossible to ignore. Because the knights were no longer responding to the enemy's actions, They were reacting to their own confusion, attempting to regain footing in a situation that offered none, and this reactionary posture ensured that every decision was made under stress, and stress narrows perspective, making complex problems appear unsolvable, and this narrowing was evident in the way commanders began to repeat strategies that had already failed, not because they believed they would work, but because familiarity felt safer than experimentation, and familiarity in this context was fatal, because the Mongols thrived on predictability, using it to anticipate responses and prepare counters before they were even attempted. And this anticipation reinforced the sense that the enemy was always one step ahead, a perception that undermined morale further. Because morale depends on the belief that effort can change outcome, and when that belief fades, effort becomes mechanical rather than purposeful. And mechanical effort lacks adaptability, and adaptability was the decisive factor in this confrontation. And as night approached, the European forces found themselves exhausted, not from sustained fighting, but from sustained uncertainty, because uncertainty demands constant vigilance, and constant vigilance without resolution drains mental reserves faster than physical exertion, and this mental fatigue carried into the third day, shaping decisions before they were even made, because fatigue reduces tolerance for ambiguity, prompting individuals to seek closure even at the expense of strategic advantage. And this desire for closure manifested in attempts to force engagement, to compel the enemy into a decisive confrontation that would restore a sense of order. And the Mongols anticipated this impulse because it aligned perfectly with their strategy. And when the third day began, the stage was set for the culmination of a process that had been unfolding since the first moment of contact, because the knights were now driven not by confidence, but by the need to end uncertainty. And this need made them vulnerable, because it encouraged commitment without full understanding. And commitment under incomplete information is precisely what the Mongols were prepared to exploit. And as events accelerated, the final phase of the encounter unfolded not as a dramatic clash, but as a rapid unraveling, because once the knights committed fully, their options narrowed dramatically, and the flexibility that had eluded them earlier became impossible to recover, and this narrowing created a cascade of consequences, as decisions made under pressure compounded previous mistakes, leaving little room for adjustment, and within a span of hours, the outcome that had seemed unimaginable only days earlier became undeniable, not because of overwhelming force, but because the European system had exhausted its capacity to adapt, and this exhaustion was total, affecting leadership, morale, and coordination simultaneously. And when these elements fail together, collapse follows quickly, and this collapse shocked Europe not because it occurred, but because of how it occurred, quietly, methodically, and without the kind of spectacle that could be easily explained or dismissed. And this lack of spectacle made the defeat more disturbing, because it suggested that the loss was not the result of a singular error or unlucky circumstance, but of a fundamental mismatch between two approaches to warfare. And as news of the encounter spread westward, it carried with it not just reports of defeat, but a deeper unease, because it forced a reconsideration of assumptions that had long gone unchallenged, assumptions about security, superiority, and the permanence of established systems. And this reconsideration marked the true beginning of Europe's shock, because it extended beyond the battlefield into the realm of belief, prompting questions that had no easy answers. And as chroniclers struggled to make sense of what had happened, they often focused on numbers, on speed, on tactics, attempting to isolate variables that could be studied and addressed. But beneath these analyses lay a more unsettling realization that the Mongols had succeeded not by outmatching Europe's strength, but by rendering it irrelevant, and this realization lingered long after the 3 days had ended, reshaping strategic thought and collective memory alike, because it demonstrated that no system, no matter how entrenched, is immune to collapse, when confronted by an opponent who understands its assumptions better than it does itself. And as the dust settled and the immediate consequences became clear, the full significance of those 3 days began to emerge, not as a story of defeat alone, but as a lesson in adaptability, humility, and the dangers of mistaking tradition for invulnerability, setting the stage for a lasting transformation in how Europe understood the nature of conflict, power, and uncertainty. A transformation born not from gradual evolution, but from the sudden, disorienting realization that the rules it had relied upon no longer guaranteed survival,